There's some new ammunition in the abortion war. Today on Channel 6 News Focus, Annetta Wilson talks about a new method of abortion approved by the Food and Drug Administration.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Channel 6 News Focus. I'm Annetta Wilson. RU486, the controversial French drug that induces abortions, has received conditional approval by the Food and Drug Administration. At least one clinic in Orlando already has plans to provide the drug. Here's reporter Lisa Colagrassi.
These pills, RU486, could revolutionize the way women terminate an unwanted pregnancy.
It's more a choice of a woman's preference, a surgical procedure and what's involved in that versus taking some medication and what's involved in that. And there are pros and cons for the individual woman. And good counseling about abortion includes alternatives to abortion and the various means of an abortion if that's the woman's decision.
Dr. James Pendergraft recently opened the Orlando Women's Clinic downtown. He has already been using another form of drug-induced abortions and says he will provide RU486 to women when the FDA gives it final approval. But anti-abortion advocates say they are not convinced RU486 is safe and say it will result in more abortions.
A lot of women who don't think they could go through the surgical procedure will now think that they can choose this. To them, it'll seem like an easier way to abort or kill a baby.
Diane Woodcock is with Life for Kids, an organization that counsels pregnant women and encourages alternatives to abortion. She says taking RU486 will not eliminate the emotional toll of having an abortion.
The woman, once she knows she's pregnant, she knows that there's a baby in there. She may try to discount that and not think about it. But this drug is given to a woman after her baby's heart begins to beat. So it is the killing of a baby, and I think a woman will know that. I mean, they'll say that it's not going to affect them, but I know because I had an abortion, I know the effect it has on a woman.
That was reporter Lisa Colagrassi. Joining us this morning for what promises to be an interesting discussion are Nicole Arfaras-Kerr with the Liberty Counsel and Dr. James Pendergraft, who was referred to in Lisa's piece that you just saw. Good morning and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Annetta.
Let's get some basics out of the way. Dr. Pendergraft, describe to us exactly how RU486 works.
RU486 is what they call the French pill. It's been used in France since the late 70s by French women. Essentially, the way that the RU486 works is that it is an anti-progesterone medication.
What does that mean?
Progesterone is the endocrine part of the female body that causes the uterus to remain quiet.
Okay.
So that if you take away progesterone, the hormone, it will cause the uterus to begin to contract. So what RU486 does is it essentially blocks the receptors on the uterus of the progesterone sites, which causes the uterus itself to begin contracting, which begins the initiation of the termination procedure.
Is this a long, drawn-out kind of procedure? Is this you take one pill and it's over, or you take several pills? How long a process are we talking about?
What the individual person would do is come to the office and they would get some tablets to take, the RU486 tablets, and then 48 hours up to 4 to 5 days later, they would come back and get another different type of medication, which is misoprostol, which is a prostaglandin. And what prostaglandins do, it's also a natural hormone in the body as well, but when taken in a higher quantity, it causes the uterus to also contract.
Okay, so this process takes a while. And that has been part of the argument for anti-abortion forces, that the safety, that women will not come back after that first or second dose of medication to make sure the abortion process is complete. We're going to get to you in a minute, Nicole, but how has that problem been handled in Europe since this medication has been used for 20 years?
Well, when women take the RU486, they understand that the completion of the process is to use the misoprostol tablets. There have not been that has not been a concern in Europe, and since I have been using a very similar medication to the RU486 in my office for the past couple of months, and we've probably done near close to 100 now, all of the patients have come back.
Okay.
So this has not been a problem in Europe or even in my experience.
Okay. Nicole, you are with the Liberty Council.
That's correct.
Tell us briefly what that organization is about.
Sure. Liberty Council is a religious, civil liberties, education, and legal defense organization. We're a nonprofit organization that exists to defend religious freedom and to protect the sanctity of life.
Your take on this whole RU486 debate?
We're very concerned about it. The doctor, I think, accurately explained the process that you first go in, you have to schedule an appointment with the doctor and get the RU486, which is a pill that you ingest. You go home, and sometimes that's enough to terminate the pregnancy, and you may end up expelling the fetus, that's the terminology used, at your home. Sometimes that doesn't work. You need to go back a second time to get the prostaglandin, as he described, which is something that will cause the contractions to be induced and, again, expel the fetus. Now, typically when you take the prostaglandin, you're in the doctor's office and you stay there for 3 or 4 hours and hope that the process takes place there. Sometimes that does not occur. If that doesn't occur, you go home, and the expelling of the fetus could happen at any time, at anywhere, and you really don't know. It could happen at home, it could happen at work, it could happen in the car.
So your concern is the uncertainty over when this process is completed?
Well, that's correct, and that's one of the differences between the American system and the European system. In Europe, the abortion industry is much more regulated than it is here. In fact, when they do this procedure in Europe, it's required that there are life-saving equipments in the office when this is happening, because if a woman were to expel the fetus in her car, for example, there could be all kinds of complications. She could begin to hemorrhage. There's sorts of things like that. Not only is there psychological trauma in expelling your own fetus in your home, in your car, wherever the case may be, but there could be medical consequences as well. And there is documentation of that happening, that women whose lives are threatened because they're not within the reach of a doctor when this happens.
We're going to pick back up with that because that's a valid point, and I'd like for you to address that, Dr. Pendergraft, when we come back. Our discussion this morning, the controversial so-called French abortion pill RU486. Stay with us. Welcome back to Channel 6 News Focus. I'm Annetta Wilson. Our topic this morning, RU486, the drug that has just been given conditional approval by the Food and Drug Administration to be used to administer abortions. When we left off, Nicole, you mentioned the sometimes very real possibility of a pregnancy being terminated when a woman is not under a doctor's supervision. Dr. Pendergraft, what has been your experience in the drug that you're currently using, which I'm assuming works very similar to this drug?
Yes, methotrexate is used in chemotherapy, using chemotherapy in men and women, as well as for psoriasis and arthritis.
Have you found that problem? Nicole mentioned what could be some scary situations.
Actually, there has been extensive documentation of the use of methotrexate as well as with RU486. With methotrexate, there's a study that was done with over 3,000 patients. And what I've heard Nicole describe, where there was a sudden amount of hemorrhage, or the fact that that the expelling of the gestational tissue was done outside the physician's office, is something that caused a patient to die or to hemorrhage to death. There have been no situations where I personally have had to do a DNC due to a patient hemorrhaging. When I look in the literature and extensively in the European literature as well as the American literature, I see and have found no evidence of what her concern is happening.
What do
And the
you
experience.
Well, there is documentation. In fact, before the FDA, testimony has been presented. In fact, some of the trials that are being done in America right now for the approval of RU486, there were some trials done in Iowa, and a doctor there, in fact, this was kind of interesting, Planned Parenthood of Greater Iowa reported that of the 238 women participating in their trials, there were no complications. Well, that's inaccurate. There was a doctor who treated a woman from one of these trials, and this woman ended up in his office, and half of her blood had been drained out. She'd hemorrhaged and lost half of her blood, almost died. He gave her medical records to Planned Parenthood of Greater Iowa, and they just ignored it. They said there were no complications, and his testimony contradicts that.
Well, clearly this is a subject that's going to keep the abortion debate alive. One issue that has to be addressed, though, there have been concerns that because this method is non-surgical, it will result in a higher number of pregnancy terminations. Have you found any evidence that that has been the case, especially in France, where the drug has been used for quite a number of years now?
No, I don't see any indication that the number of women that terminate has increased due to RU486. The thing that RU486 does is give a woman a different choice to make as far as doing the termination earlier, because you can do it as early as the time that she knows that she's pregnant. And also it decreases the anxiety and fear of a lot of women who would prefer not to, one, be put to sleep, or two, have to use lidocaine, a numbing medication that goes into the cervix, as well as dilators to open up the cervix, which women vary on the intensity of the discomfort. Some women don't feel any discomfort, and some women do.
Your concern on that issue?
Well, I would disagree with the doctor. I think that it could be extremely traumatic. As we've mentioned, if you're in your own home, in your bathroom, and you end up passing your fetus, as it were, in your own bathroom, I think that could be extremely traumatic. And there is significant pain that accompanies this procedure. Women regularly have to take analgesics or even narcotic strength painkillers with this. They'd say that the pain is excruciating and the whole thing is just very, very devastating. But my big concern is how this is being fast-tracked through the FDA, that the FDA Commissioner, David Kessler, promised abortion rights advocates that this drug would be approved within 6 months prior to any American data being gathered. Before there was any data in, he said, we're going to approve it. And he gave conditional approval already. Even though the data is not complete, it won't be completed till the end of 1996. And our big concern is that there is no research being done on the long-term effects of RU486.
What about that? It's obviously not a new drug. It's been used in Europe for almost 20 years. What does the data show in terms of long-term effects?
The data that I've seen doesn't show any long-term abnormalities that are associated with 486. Women who, addressing another point, is the fact that women who use RU486 versus have had a suction DNC performed unanimously prefer to have the RU486.
And the reason?
None of these women have any have complained or argued or been upset from the point of view of expelling tissue
That's untrue.
at home.
That's
or
simply
in the
inaccurate.
car or wherever it goes. And if there's data that shows that differently, then we can address that.
Yeah, there are two. Time magazine did a piece on this, and the New York Times did a piece on this, and these are hardly bastions of pro-life thought. This is a quote from Julie, who is one of the persons. She said, "I was at the clinic about 6 hours when finally I expelled it. When I looked at it, it had 2 dark spots like eyes and a little skeleton not quite formed. I feel quite empty. If I'd expelled this at home, I'm sure I would have kept it. I couldn't have just flushed it down the toilet." Now that comes out of Health magazine, but yeah, there's documentation and testimony that women are very, very traumatized by this procedure.
Then we get into the issue of choice. Surgical versus RU486 versus adoption versus keeping a child. So the debate, clearly, this just adds another player, if you will, into that whole abortion debate. What task or what where is the Liberty Counsel going to go with this in terms of this whole battle now?
Well, we're sympathetic to those who have filed. The Americans United for Life and other organizations, members of Congress, physicians have filed a citizens petition for before the FDA saying you need to slow down. We have no data, again, on the long-term effects. We don't know about the link between abortion and breast cancer, which the medical literature is clear that there's a link between those two. We don't know how this is going to affect subsequent pregnancies. Is there a toxic buildup if women use RU486 once and use it again? Is there some sort of chemical leftover situation in the body that affects the mother and subsequent children? And the record on reproductive medications being given to women or drugs such as the Dalcon Shield device, DES, the evidence is clear that there are long-term effects to each of these things that are devastating to mothers and their children. And that's what we're saying, is the FDA needs to slow down, gather the data before it leashes this on the public.
Okay, Dr. Pendergraft, we're going to let you have the last word here quickly.
Basically, it's good to talk about things in the past that have failed with the Dalcon Shield and the DES. There's no question from looking at the world literature that the long-term effect of RU486 are none that I have seen. Of course, if a physician makes a mistake and does a termination using RU486 on a 11 or 12-week gestation, then yes, there's a possibility that there may be fetal parts. But the majority of women, when the protocol is set up and done appropriately, fetuses that the gestational tissue that passes between 3 and 7 weeks is no more than what you would see with a heavy menstrual period.
Okay, we're going to have to let that be the last word, because clearly we could keep going on this for the next 2 or 3 days, and you can be assured that the debate is going to continue on this issue. Thank you both for being with us, and at least starting the ball rolling and starting some people thinking about choices, and obviously a new one that is available for women, should they choose to avail themselves of it or not. Thank you both.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of Channel 6 News Focus. I'm